Many people have problems with art and not with reality.
So why is art different?
It's pretty simple, right?
This is knowledge, this is thinking, this is thought.
Yeah, it does something strange with your head.
Welcome to the Undergang Armchair.
Bring it.
Welcome to episode 54 of the Undergang Armchair Podcast. My name is Ando. Alright, walkin', thinkin', walkin'. Today on the show we are joined by the artist and art magician Matthew Stone, who we caught up with on the eve of the opening of his show here in Copenhagen at V1 Gallery. This was back in December. It was cold, and because time was short, we ended up actually going for a walk together to the main train station here in Copenhagen in order to meet a friend of his who was arriving from London. But I'll get back to that in just a second. I would actually like to give a big shout out to Tyler Green, who's the host of an exceptional arts podcast called the Modern Art Notes Podcast. He's been kind enough to help us spread the word about our program, and I want to be sure to tell you guys that his program is excellent. And unlike this show, he actually knows what he's talking about. We'll have a link up to his podcast on the show notes for this episode. Be sure to check that out. I'd also like to say hi to all the new listeners. Welcome aboard this ever-changing ship. So, I met up with Matthew Stone on a cold evening here in town, and we ended up going on a nice walk. This means that the talk is divided into 4 sections. The first one we started in the gallery at V1. The second one is the walk to the main station. It's a little windy, sorry about that. The third is at the main station. See if you can hear the teenagers yelling at us. And the final one is on the way back to the gallery. You'd think it would be a mess, but it actually surprisingly works, and I wouldn't really do it any other way. It's just, mwah. It's actually mostly due to the fact that Matthew is great, though. So, enjoy.
I travel quite a bit. I haven't traveled this year as much as I have previously. I've been in my studio in London a lot.
On purpose?
Kind of, yeah. Actually, it's not that it feels like I've on purpose not been traveling. It feels like I was on purpose trying to travel more in the past. Like I was like, I really want to like not live anywhere and be somewhere for 2 months and then have to go somewhere else.
Like a lifestyle thing almost.
Kind of, just like...
Can you get work done in that situation?
Yeah, well the idea was always that I would go somewhere because there was work to do. And it was like, I would like invent something to do.
Right, right. Well, I mean, you obviously like people and like working with people, and
yeah,
you know, you're not the sequestered away in the attic.
No, although to make this show, it's been a bit more like that.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's just less... I mean, it's good and it's bad. I think what's really nice about it is that I've got into some slower rhythms of like physically making stuff.
Uh-huh.
And it is less sort of connected in terms of like, you know, working with people,
mm-hmm.
or even like people as kind of material or medium in a sense. And that sort of has its advantages and disadvantages. Like paint always turns up on time, and
True.
You don't feel bad for...
And doesn't tell you about being hungover or...
Sure. or how busy it is.
Right.
That's yeah.
Yeah, I myself am trying to get back to working with my hands and materials because I'm a photographer.
Right.
But I only shoot film because I'm an idiot. But what that means is usually I shoot film and then scan it and sit at the computer anyways. So what I'm really doing is just adding another layer of work to the final output.
Right.
Instead of actually getting in the darkroom or,
okay,
you know, working on that level. Like,
yeah, but the darkroom is just an analog version of Photoshop.
Yeah, but your physical movements and interactions with it are entirely different.
Okay.
So
they are different. I mean, yeah, I think something in terms of that sort of difference between sort of a physical interaction and a kind of sort of perceived digital interaction, for me, that with these works has been really interchangeable, because I've literally at one moment been sort of because there's sort of two moments where I'm actually hand painting with real paint,
right?
And then there's this sort of other similar gesture that occurs with like the Wacom digital tablet,
right?
So the pen, which I'm sort of drawing on Photoshop with. And there's a lot of sort of similarities of gesture, certainly between basically the canvases that I've made. They're sort of selectively primed, and it's very detailed painting, but it's just pure white to get the eventual print brighter.
Right.
And there's this thing of kind of going right up to the edge and getting the edge really sharp, and it's very similar to cutting out the images of brushstrokes that I'm using on Photoshop using this pen tool. And I realized that the other day somebody was showing me an image on a screen, and I had a notepad in my hand and a pen, and I tried to screenshot the screen and then paste it in real time into my sketchbook. And I realized that like my brain thought that there was this sort of instant transferal available.
Right, they became interchangeable, the two processes.
Yeah. And also just that thing that one could become the other. And that has sort of happened in the work. Obviously, it's not as quick as that. Like I am sort of moving between actually, working with paint and then digitizing it, and then kind of digital painting the paint.
Right.
In terms of sort of Photoshop and retouch.
Well, it does sound confusing. I understand why all of a sudden you're starting to switch them around in a way.
Well, in a weird way, it felt confusing that it didn't work. Not that it was... I didn't feel confused. It felt like the world hadn't caught up.
Right. Like, yeah, right. The technology just wasn't ready. It was a beta
Exactly.
version.
And I think that, that sort of interface between physical reality and digital reality, just that gap has to keep getting closer.
I think it is. I mean, there's a whole pushback to digital processes. I think in a way there's this whole, as a photographer, there's a lot of talk about film and traditional materials and,
but that's just the same
daguerreotypes.
But that's just the same as like people still making paintings after photography was invented.
Sure. But I mean, kids are shooting film now, whereas kids 6 years ago weren't shooting film. It's like become this like weird.
Yeah,
it's
I would say
a thing for them, obviously.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, I can still be nostalgic about music that I didn't grow up, that existed before I was born.
But are you nostalgic for your first experiences with it, or are you nostalgic for the fact that you could have been there, like some sort of feeling you have?
Well, I think there's a kind of there's like real nostalgia for actual events, and then there's nostalgia for like sort of romanticized past that you haven't
experienced. Is that like jealousy nostalgia?
Yeah,
like
it's
if
that
only
whole
I'd
thing
been
of like
there
if
in the
only
summer of love.
Exactly. If only I'd been alive in '79 or I don't know. These things usually actually occur a few years before, so maybe like 73 or something.
Right.
The roots of it, but yeah. So I think there's a kind of nostalgia operates in different ways, but it's all kind of this desire to connect to something that seems more authentic than what's actually happening now.
So is that actually a part of the works you have up right now?
I think in a way there is. Yeah, I mean, I definitely acknowledge some of the nostalgia of paint, and in a way I feel like I'm acknowledging some of the redundancies of paint. And whilst I don't feel like the works exist to kind of debunk painting in any way, they do at the same time, but they only do it to find a way to make paintings again.
Right.
So it's
granted,
like,
they are painterly. You can say you're not making fun of painting.
Sure. Yeah. And well, I suppose, in theory, I could sort of be doing it ironically and in some sort of like...
They don't seem snarky, though, I wouldn't say.
No. I mean, I don't think I'm capable of it, unfortunately.
I don't know if that's unfortunate, though.
No. I mean, maybe I'm just being facetious, but I don't know. There's a lot. I've definitely been accused of, and by people I respect, of being too earnest.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's something I say about the Danes. Quick background. I'm half Danish. My mom's American.
Right.
My dad's Danish.
Right.
Grew up in America. Have a strong connection to Denmark.
Right.
Should we keep it on time?
We could set out soon.
Why don't we just do that, actually?
Yeah.
So we don't have to worry about time. Okay, I'm going to hit pause so we don't make horrible mic noises. right, so now we're walking. Right, so the quick background was I'm half American, half Danish, and that means I accuse the Danes of being terribly earnest because Americans are terribly cynical for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, certain Americans. I think there's a lot of sort of insane, sunny optimism in America as well.
True, but it's completely fake.
Right. But actually, I would sort of disagree. I met some women from Texas, and I was trying to explain to them that if I went into a store in the UK and somebody was kind of like, how are you doing?
Hey, honey.
Like, if you need, like, they might say, do you need any help with anything? But that's it. They're not going to be like, have a nice day.
Right.
Like, if someone said that to you, you would just think they were being facetious in London. And I was trying to explain that to them, and they said they couldn't imagine a situation. They said that if somebody didn't say, like, have a nice day when they'd serve them, they would literally thought they'd done something wrong, and that they genuinely saw it as this kind of sense of community, and I believe them genuinely.
Well, I mean, I miss the chattiness in a way, because now I live in Northern Europe, and there is that whole like, well, I don't know you,
right?
Like, I don't need to.
Why would I bother?
I know you need to buy something, and that's cool. I'll help you with that, but
I mean, that's the other thing, is that I feel like I'm being pressured to buy something if somebody talks to me, as if like they're going to be like, that looks so nice on you, and then I'll buy it. But I mean, I don't spend that much time in stores where that would happen.
Sure. But I mean, what about earnestness in art? Is that, I mean, I don't think that's a legitimate criticism.
Okay.
Do you? I mean, do you put weight into that?
Well, I guess I guess I don't really understand whether there's a difference between... Is there a difference between being sincere and being earnest? Because earnest
is just like a little more condescending.
Right, but what is the implication there? That somebody is...
naive.
Right, okay.
I would say.
Yeah. And so... Yeah, I hope not to be naive.
Okay, yeah, that's more... Them's more fighting words.
Yeah. But it's... Yeah, I mean, there are lots of words that are used that supposedly have neutral meanings, but are definitely, in their contemporary usage, they imply a criticism.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, they might have been seen as sort of virtuous.
I know, but, I just feel like...
Even virtue.
Well,
is virtue ever a compliment, or is it if someone's being virtuous, are they being a good person, or are they being a moralistic,
dude? I'll tell you, I don't know what virtue means, to be honest. Like, if you really if you really deconstruct that word, what does that mean? Because I understand moral more than I understand virtuous.
Yeah, I mean,
because virtuous sounds so Catholic.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all those associations that people are trying to kind of distance themselves from. But there's sort of certain sort of aspects of things like goodness that maybe are still important if they are stripped of their sort of...
Clearly.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole thing about like being called earnest or naive. I would say that the opposite is far worse.
I don't think the opposite of naive is bad, because that's just somebody who has knowledge.
Well, it depends on whether it's cynical or experienced or
but
wise.
I think whilst they might be conversational counterparts, I think if you actually think about it, they're not, because the opposite of being naive to a situation would be like having a sense of awareness of a situation.
Right.
But we would say like the opposite of being naive is being cynical, but that's essentially... Cynicism is a kind of over-awareness that renders somebody kind of creates this sort of state where people are sort of suddenly unable to do something that previously they felt like they could connect to.
Right.
That there's a kind of loss of innocence or something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a circle you can really go into. But I guess the question for me more...
sort of makes me think that it doesn't exist. Usually if things get lost in circles, they're just...
It's pedantic.
Yeah, or it's sort of just language eating itself.
Yeah. And
people not really sort of obeying a rationale rather than being rational.
Right. But let's talk about like how this relates to your work then, though. That's the real question for me. Because like, okay, so you said some people accuse you of being earnest, right?
Right.
Are you thinking like, no, I'm nuts, like I'm not wise or something, because for me, earnestness is often positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think
childlike,
Okay.
What was it? Warhol said that, you should see the world as a 6-year-old or some horribly paraphrased thing like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely Picasso was kind of interested in painting like a child.
Right. Childlike states.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain. I think that for kids everything's new, so they exist in this state of wonder.
Yeah.
So things are exciting that once you've experienced them quite a few times cease to be exciting.
Sure.
But having said that, I know people who, you know, I have a friend who's maybe in her 70s, and when I look at her looking at things, I sometimes get this moment where I look at her and I see a toddler. So I see this person who is just like with their mouth open, and they're just like literally in awe of like the people that they surround themselves with and what's happening and what's going on. And
but is that a function of age, or has she always been like that?
Well, if anything, I'm arguing that it's not. It doesn't have to be tied to age.
Got it.
Sure, it's attitude. I think for most people, there's like, from your kind of like early 20s onwards, there is this sort of like, there's a kind of lessening of that type of engaged, excited activity. But there are certain people who I guess, unconsciously seek out. Who maintain that level of energy like throughout their whole lives.
Well, I think one of the I'm starting to realize now that one of life's great tragedies, or whatever you want to call it, difficulties, is the fact. This is totally personal. I should totally just say this is my great tragedy, but that
own it. The great thing about making huge authoritative statements is that people are allowed to disagree.
Right. Okay. Word. Got it. So that like in your 20s, you're a mess, right?
Okay.
AKA, I was a mess.
Right.
No trouble, but like not focused, not paying attention, not goal achieving towards goals I really truly wanted, right?
Okay, right.
So then I managed to beat myself into a functioning, goal-driven human.
Right.
This is very rewarding for me. However, I've beaten the fun out of it in a way.
Okay.
So now I'm trying to go back to being more childlike.
Right.
Like, you don't have to work all the time, dude. Just because you have a clear goal that you're totally invested in, you can fucking have a break.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Go ride a bike. You know, whatever.
Yeah. I
whatever that entails.
A friend of mine said to me the other day that she was worried that at the moment the only conversations she had with her friends were about gluten or the work-life balance.
Right.
And I think, there's some things. I guess this conversation at this point has a huge danger of just becoming one of those conversations, which is exactly what happened when she said that.
Right.
Between me and her.
Right.
We discussed gluten and work-life balance.
But what about for you personally? I mean, do you...
What, gluten?
No. What? Like, you work hard. You got a lot of shit going on. Is it natural for you, or is it managed?
I've had to learn to manage it.
Uh-huh.
And I have had to learn what relaxation is and try and do it.
Right, turning it off.
Yeah. Just being slower. Like, I think I used to think that relaxation was like sort of, I just didn't think it was real.
It's something people who did jobs that I didn't like had to do.
Yeah, I thought it was escapism from life.
Totally.
Rather than,
I'm fucking tired.
Rather than a sort of one, it's an experience that can be had within life. And I also just think that it's essential for any type of healing.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I also realized that the more I relax, the more I factor in to relax. I mean, I don't think this would work if I just kept adding it in. But at the moment, by adding in relaxation, I get more done.
Right. Well, it's, we all know
because I'm able to think
brain.
Clearly. Exactly. So rather than like freaking out and working on something for 1 minute and then going to the next thing and the next thing and then just constantly.
Right.
I think in the past, if I'm completely honest, I think I used to confuse anxiety with excitement. And so I thought I was just like constantly excited, but actually
This is amazing. I can't sleep.
I'm doing so much stuff. Like,
Right.
I've got to do this thing, and I've got to
Right.
run there.
Right.
And so I think that I didn't realize that it was actually just like stressful.
Right. Well, how about the way your ideas develop? You know, do you need space and time, or are you really more working from the heart and the stomach, and you can just go?
I don't know. It's sort of a bit of both. I definitely feel like I sort of recognize what I'm doing once I've done it. And I feel like...
We can go down here.
Okay.
Do you know which track they're arriving on?
No,
then we have to go this way.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like for example, with the works that I'm doing, I've only just not only just, but it was only when I sort of sat down and thought about press release and things like that I realized that, I don't know, for a long time people have said to me that the photography that I take, they would kind of offer me this compliment, which I was never sure whether I appreciated, but I mean I did, and I knew it was always a compliment. But I was like, is it actually worth anything? People would say, oh, your photographs look so much like paintings. And that's obviously a compliment, and it's obviously something, painting. Absolutely. And painting is a huge influence on my photography, the history of painting, particularly sort of Western religious art and its treatment of the body. But I was kind of like, isn't that a bit dumb to just be making photos that look like paintings?
Right.
And then I kind of was looking at the works I've made most recently, and it suddenly clicked, and I was like, oh my God, I've made photographs that look so much like paintings that no one can accept that they're photographs anymore.
Well, I mean, even the way you print them, the materials you put them on. And,
right. I mean, it's like, yeah, because I was thinking, is it stupid that I'm putting these on linen? Like, is it just like trying to make them like paintings? I was like, no, that is what I'm trying to do. That
is what it is, yeah.
Yeah, and so, because at first I kind of thought that there was something in the idea that it was somehow controversial or interesting to print paintings rather than paint them. That somehow that was kind of like, for people that would be a challenging idea, and that painters would be like, you should do it the old way, the proper way, a bit like you and your film,
right?
Maybe.
Well, no, but
I'm teasing you. But actually, everybody was on board. Like, everybody was just like, yeah, they're paintings.
Yeah, that's what you do. We know this.
So there wasn't like no one had a problem with the fact they were printed.
Well, were you disappointed?
In that, I mean, I was just surprised because I anticipated it. And even from painters, no one really gave a shit. Everyone got it and was like, yeah, I get it, Right. And so I was like, this is interesting. And then suddenly I realized that actually thinking about these works not as paintings, but as photographs is way more interesting. So there's so much more that can be taken from that process than from processing them as paintings themselves. So now I even toyed with the idea, although the problem was I had the idea after it had gone to print. I thought about the idea of titling the show New Photography.
Just to because one more layer.
Yeah, and also just to claim them as photographs, and to kind of and I think that's also funny. There is a big element of they really don't look like photos. So, and also New Photography is a really it's a dumb title anyway. It sounds like a museum survey show or like a Taschen book or something.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at, I mean, what it seems like is that it's free, it's open, you do what you want.
Right.
Okay, we gotta stop though. This is too crazy.
I know.
We gotta find. Hold on a second here. I'll stop this.
But in this circumstance, black ones would go undercover.
You think so?
Yeah, look at that.
True. I should rethink my windscreen policy here. Where the hell are we? Where were we? We've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about art school, and we've talked about... So you weren't even making pictures. You were at school.
Photos.
Right, photos.
Yeah.
You were at school making paintings, and then you kind of fell into photography.
I was studying painting. I was probably making performance and sculpture and some sort of performative props, I guess.
So you were checking stuff out. trying things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was maybe some photography, but it wasn't. I didn't see it. I saw it more as like documentation of sort of, or sort of almost maybe myth building. Or so they were sort of part of performative projects,
right?
But then they're sort of. I think there was this. Actually, I remember there was this decisive moment where one of my tutors. She kind of said to me, like, you know, we really like your energy. There's lots of activity. You're, you know, highly productive, and it's really interesting. But I feel like a lot of what you're doing revolves around you, and it would be nice to see something where we could just look at it without you being here, and that it would stand up. And I was like, shit, she's right.
That's one of those places where art school really works.
Yeah, and I was like, you know, making all these performances where I was sort of a key figure within the performance. And then, yeah, just, you know, embarrassing art school type work.
Gotta do it. It's part of it.
I mean, and then looking back, yeah. But basically, as soon as she said that, I was kind of like, okay, if I don't make work about me, what am I making work about?
Was that like a I've got nothing moment now? Like you had to reset everything and start?
Kind of. I definitely took it. I definitely took it quite. Yeah, I took it head on, and I guess I felt like I sort of had to answer it in my work, and so my conclusion was, okay, if I can't make work about me, I'll make work about everybody else. And so I took this kind of, I sort of staged this group portrait of all my sort of what I perceived as my fabulous friends at the time. And so there's this sort of big group shot that involves friends of mine who sort of have gone on to do lots of different types of creative careers.
Other art students, basically.
Yeah, or like fashion students and people doing music, people in bands, stuff like that. And so I shot this ridiculous sort of Caravaggesque, very kind of like dramatically lit, very photoshopped portrait, which had people like flying in the air and stuff like that. And that became my degree shot. And so that was the first sort of like piece of photography that I really was like viewed as being an artwork.
Did you develop that? Like, did you look at that and say, okay, the bodies are what's interesting here? Or
yeah,
like, how did that develop further?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in a very literal way, that became the beginning of a series in a way, which were these sort of black background piles of bodies, and I think that first one was very much about the idea of creating an idea of a scene and representing it, as much as it was a formal work in the sense that it's a photo or a kind of digital composite involving photography. It was in a way I was thinking about like the idea of presenting a group of people as an artwork, as a kind of sort of social sculpture, you know, a sort of living collaborative work in a sense. And I'd always been interested since I was very young in the idea of trying to create a scene and thinking about like Warhol's factory and stuff like that.
So it's like surrounding yourself with the world you want to make. Like-minded
individuals. That's the term that kind of always comes up.
Right. I mean, I saw you reference somewhere that you don't really try to divide art and life. You know, they are together. They are the same thing in a lot of ways.
I mean, I think I think that you can live your life as art, and I think that art speaks about life. For me, when it's most interesting or most powerful, it's, you know, it says something about people's lives, and the art doesn't need to be about life to speak about it, because, you know, there are philosophical implications in things that are, you know, very abstract and you don't see immediately mirrored in the world, but they still have the capacity to speak to us about situations that otherwise we might sort of see as mundane.
Well, it seems also like that would be related to your own creative process and the way you develop works. You know, like I've heard you photograph your friends.
Yeah, and I mean, that's sort of, definitely, that was where I started.
Models, they're not...
No, exactly. I mean, the thing is like, I have it's sort of that's sort of absolutely where it started. But I think I work with dancers a lot, and I think that's sort of different to the friend thing. There's definitely a kind of like, I feel like creative people get where I'm going with the work, so they're great to photograph, so they're not like, oh, I don't want to do this, it's weird, or that looks gay, or like so creative people are really great for that, and also you can have amazing conversations, and it somehow just feels like that might seep into the images, but with dancers, they have this like physicalized knowledge, like they literally think with their bodies, and I think that type of intelligence is something that I'm really interested in. The idea that something can be that we think with more than just our brains, and it's not just that, like, I don't know, that the gut is the second most intelligent part of the body beyond the brain. It's like literally the way that we physically do things becomes a way of thinking. So things like drawing are a really good example of like, while you're doing it, the doing of it affects what happens while it's happening, and and it's not a sort of thought in the way that we are so used to thinking about thinking, which is like a kind of isolated statement that exists in our head rather than said out loud or something. It's this whole body activity.
Right, the performance of making something is embedded in the work itself too.
I don't, I feel like everything I do is performative in one way or another, and there is a sense of movement, but also just this idea of things that are sort of consciously created rather than objectively documented. Like, I don't really sort of believe in objectivity. I don't think that you can stand outside of a situation and rationally document it. I think that everybody is a participant, and
there's a lot of angry amateur photographers right now.
Oh, really?
Don't you think? When you say that, I mean, people think about it. Still, photography is seen as truthful. Still,
but it's insane. That's insane. Like, that the idea has just been debunked so many times. Like, it's such a highly subjective thing. The way that you frame something, all of the potentially thousands of decisions that are made.
Sure, but think about the news, the way people receive news.
Sure, no, I mean, it's
so visual, it's so photo video based.
Yeah, but then also think about the manipulation that occurs. You only have to look at two different newspapers and they've got two different images.
Sure.
Because they know that they want to say something different in that context.
Friend alert. All right, okay. We're hitting pause here.
Cool.
Right. That's right. We were talking about how your work has like the performative nature embedded into it, and maybe, like, could you say that that's a through line through all of your works as a performance artist, a photographer, a painter, a sculptor?
I mean, I feel like my works are all collaborative in one sense, and I mean, perhaps the most recent works are sort of the least collaborative. There are sort of printers and people like that work on it, but it is sort of separate from things where I sort of sit down with someone who I feel like I have I suppose I'm friends with the printers. But
you're becoming more introspective in your work, I guess, is how I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think literally because in the past, everything that I've done has always involved other people, and if those people were removed, the work would sort of disappear in a way.
Right.
Whether that is performance or whether that is photographing people, there was this sort of physical presence of other people.
Right.
And
is that performative, that presence?
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of what I was saying before, but I think ultimately I feel like I make works, but really the work exists as the social spaces that I create.
Right. I mean, I was going to say, does the work exist as I don't want to say a byproduct, but an interaction with your life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's sort of, yeah. I think that all work is that. I mean, I think all our works are sort of, in a sense, they're physical.
I guess just the awareness of it, like who you seem more aware and put more of that into it.
Right. And but the work is important, and I'm not just like, it doesn't just happen. I kind of like, I focus on the work as well, and I guess I'm just trying to be transparent about the process.
Right. Well, I mean, that's important.
Yeah. And also the one thing which I discovered, which I think is really, really interesting, is that I found that as I credited my collaborative interactions with other people more, it didn't sort of detract from my own sort of impact, in a sense, on...
That's a nice realization, isn't it?
Yeah, because I realized that actually by crediting people, I became this interesting person who was like, oh, you know, he collaborates. That's really interesting.
Right.
And whereas in the past, you kind of see artists who are sort of really trying to kind of like hide the fact that somebody else is doing something for them because they want to appear to be this kind of auteur.
Right.
Is that even the word?
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
It's usually applied in
They're
a
jack
kind
of
of
all
film.
trades. They can do all things.
Sure. Or it's just sort of acknowledged that they have like sort of secret minions or something like that.
Right.
And I like the idea of, and I realized that, you know, the more I credited people, the bigger the context for me to enjoy my own ego.
Right. Well, I mean, maybe that's the thing, is like that goes
was my
against
genius,
the nature, but it makes a lot of goddamn sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't detract anything from
No,
it.
exactly. And it also, the other thing is that crediting people for things, it doesn't cost you anything.
It really doesn't. And it makes
is
you a lot of
way-
friends.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, I guess if you were trying to rip people off and take credit for their work, it would cost you something because they'd be able to say that they did it. But
Right.
And you know, I hope I'm not in the business of doing that.
I really doubt that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are nearing the blast off point. You have an
Yeah.
opening to go to.
Oh, there's a good word for what we've just done.
What's that?
Flâneur.
Ah, yes. Wandered. Yeah. That's a hot word this year. Have you noticed that?
Really?
In Denmark, it is.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
People are trying to...
walking and thinking and talking.
Yeah. Well, all I want to say is thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, I really enjoyed it. Thank
Cool,
you.
man. Thank you.
Cool.
All right, thank you for listening to this episode of the Undergang Armchair. Intro and outro music was kindly provided by Johnny Ripper, and today's interstitial music provided by David Hyde. You can find links to their music and all things Undergang related on our wonderful website, undergang.net. This show is produced in part with the kind support of the Danish Arts Council. So, remember, if you do like the show, please tell a friend. See you guys next time.